He's the rapper that is a former corrections officer. There's a video of him with the outfit on. You've seen that.
I saw it with the smooth face.
To become a corrections officer, they gotta do a background check on you. You can't be this gangster dude and be a corrections officer.
Footage claiming to show rapper Rick Ross's early days as a correctional officer has apparently surfaced online. Although this particular piece of footage is said to have been debunked by XXL magazine, many other photos from the rapper's time as a correctional officer have surfaced online over the years. Rapper Rick Ross, being a former correctional officer, had stolen the name of an inmate who was locked up during the time Rick Ross had worked as a CO, and began to promote through his songs the former lifestyle of the inmate after he'd become a rapper, which glamorized committing crimes which held lengthy prison sentences. In this video, we're going to take a look into the real identity of rapper Rick Ross, being in his past life as a correctional officer, and also hip-hop's connection into the Federal Bureau of Prisons. William Leonard Roberts II was a correctional officer during the mid-1990s. He had worked as a correctional officer in the US state of Florida for 18 months, being from 1995 to 1997. With there being over 80 facilities which correctional officers can serve at in Florida, William Roberts worked as a correctional officer being in a facility in southeastern Florida in the mid to late 90s. William Roberts' correctional officer records have been released online, which reveal many details such as his class code, place of service number, along with his salary and years of employment. The records reveal that he started his work as a correctional officer on the 29th of December 1995, being with a starting salary of $22,913.54. The records reveal that William Roberts had worked at 3 different facilities in the Miami area, being in the county code of 13, which the US government website lists as Dade County, Florida. There are 6 different detention facilities within Dade County, with it being the 7th largest county jail system in the US. The records show that William Roberts worked at 3 out of the 6 facilities from 1995 to 1997. The records reveal his last employment date as a correctional officer being listed as the 16th of June 1997, being with a salary of $25,794.34. William Roberts, after quitting his job as a correctional officer, began rapping under the name of Teflon the Don, being out of Miami Gardens of Dade County, Florida. William Roberts changed his rap moniker to Rick Ross in the mid-2000s and had got a record deal in 2006. William Roberts took the name off of Freeway Rick Ross, who was a drug kingpin who was locked up in the Federal Correctional Institution Texarkana in Texas during the time that William Roberts was a correctional officer. The real Rick Ross, which is his given birth name, has since been labelled by his past nickname of Freeway Rick Ross to differentiate the two, and was once a large-scale drug kingpin which William Roberts had stole the identity of to create a rap persona based on the prior lifestyle of the kingpin, making destructive music about selling drugs and potentially influencing the listeners into committing crime. Freeway Rick Ross was a major kingpin in California in the late 1980s who, unknown to him, had been receiving assistance from US intelligence, being through a DEA informant called Danilo Blandone. Freeway Rick Ross claims he was influenced into selling drugs by the 1972 movie called Superfly, which was released by Warner Bros. Reports from the US Army's Entertainment Liaison Office shows that the United States Department of Defense maintains a close relationship with Warner Bros, enabling them to get involved at early stages of major films and wield considerable influence over their content by providing consulting services and access to declassified information for the production of films and TV shows. Warner Bros is a Time Warner company, with Time Warner formerly having the president of a psychological operations officer for the OSS being the precursor to the CIA. The OSS was the United States Office of Strategic Services, and it was the precursor to the CIA. In 2004, OSS documents were declassified and released online, which date back to 1943, and revealed how they had infiltrated Hollywood and the music industry to use motion pictures and music as a tool of psychological warfare. Time Warner had been formed from a merger of Time Inc. and Warner Communications in 1989, with Time Inc.'s senior executive once being General Charles Douglas Jackson, who was an OSS member and was a mediator for information between the CIA and the Pentagon. He was a US government propagandist who was an expert in psychological warfare. Time Warner went on to form Warner Music Group in 1991, which went on to buy out a large amount of record labels to acquire a 22% share of the domestic music market in America. The real Rick Ross, after being influenced into selling drugs by the Warner Bros. Movie Superfly, had eventually went on to unknowingly began working with a DEA informant who was giving him US intelligence assistance, which became known as the Iran-Contra affair. President Ronald Reagan in 1981 began to declare that he would do anything possible to overthrow a group known as the Sandinistas, being a pro-communist regime in Nicaragua. The Sandinistas were in a war against a group called the Contras, which was short for counter-revolutionary. Ronald Reagan's White House initially began with aiding the Contras for 2 years. However, it soon became known that the CIA had been using explosives close to Nicaraguan harbors where Soviet ships were anchored, with this being the initial excuse for US Congress to withdraw its support for the Contras. However, it went deeper than this, as the Contras had been found to have been involved in drug smuggling to finance themselves, and now the United States had to find a way to continue funding the Contras covertly without Congress knowing, as they wanted to continue their support for the Contras. The Boland Amendment was passed by US Congress, which by law prevented Ronald Reagan's administration with interfering in Nicaraguan affairs. The war now became a covert operation which had spawned the Iran-Contra affair. National Security Council member Oliver North was assigned to sell weapons to Iran under an arms embargo to fund the Contras, which had spawned the name of the Iran-Contra affair, but it went deeper than this. CIA Inspector General Frederick P. Hitt had declassified on October 8, 1998, that more than 50 Contras and Contra-related entities were implicated in the drug trade, who were being complicitly protected and assisted by the CIA and the Reagan-Bush administration by allowing quantities to make it into the United States and by putting a stop to federal investigations which threatened to expose the operation. He also published evidence that drug trafficking and money laundering was an item into Reagan's National Security Council, where Oliver North oversaw the Contra operations, hiring people into the program under the alias of John Cafee. Danilo Blandón was from Nicaragua and had fled after the Sandinistas had came into power in 1979, and Blandón began distributing drugs for another Nicaraguan called Norwin Meneses, being in the early 1980s. A publication series called Dark Alliance by Gary Webb had revealed that Nicaraguans Blandón and Meneses were smuggling drugs from Nicaraguan Contras into the United States, being under the Iran-Contra affair, to then supply the funds to the Contras to fight the war. Danilo Blandón was supplying Freeway Rick Ross with large quantities, who was then supplying the Californian street gangs of the Bloods and Crips, which had sparked the crack epidemic of the 1980s. The first discovery of what can be labeled as a crack house was found during a Miami raid in 1982. The word crack had first appeared in the New York Times on the 17th of November 1985. The laws around the drug had been reconstructed by Joe Biden in 1986, after he crafted a bipartisan legislation bill signed into law by Ronald Reagan, which treated crack as significantly worse than powder, giving lengthier sentences for smaller amounts. The crack epidemic spread throughout several states of America during the 1980s, with some of the hardest hit places being Los Angeles and New York. Freeway Rick Ross, in a documentary Freeway Cracking the System, described how Danilo Blandón was supplying him with military-grade weapons, which were then being sold on the street to the Bloods and Crips. Former FBI Chief Ted Gunderson claimed in 1996 they had intel which indicated that guns were being left in areas for gangs to find, which was believed to have been tied into the past Iran-Contra affair. In the video game GTA San Andreas, it shows crooked cops from the LAPD Rampart Division as giving gangs tip-offs about crates of guns at railway stations. The cop called Officer Tenpenny was based on Rampart cop Rafael Perez, who was an associate of Death Row Records, who was being distributed by Interscope under Time Warner. Freeway Rick Ross claimed claimed that particular department of the Rampart Cops spawned from an offshoot of the Freeway Task Force, which had been set up to go against Freeway Rick Ross. Freeway Rick Ross was locked up in the late 1980s, where the Federal Bureau of Prisons locked him up with Michael Harry O. Harris, who was also a kingpin. Freeway Rick Ross recommended to Harry O that he get in contact with Dr. Dre and was in the visiting room when Suge Knight had met Harry O and allegedly got funding to start up Death Row Records, which symbolized the prison system promoting gangster rap. Under these conditions of the crack epidemic and the subsequent kingpins, hip-hop had begun to form, which would go on to glamorize the criminal lifestyle. The effects on the inner cities with the crack epidemic through the Iran-Contra affair of the 1980s, which was majorly headed by Rick Ross, created an environment for gangster rap to cultivate and go mainstream by the late 1980s, with the rap group NWA. Eazy-E's record label Ruthless Records, which NWA were under, had used the crack epidemic to initially fund the label by being a dealer. The label birthed several stars into the 1990s such as Eazy-E, Dr. Dre and Ice Cube, with all of them promoting gangster rap, and Dr. Dre going on to form Death Row Records. Retired CIA agent John Homestead claimed in a television interview that hip-hop was part of a psychological operation allegedly ran by the CIA in the 1980s, and claimed that it had directly but covertly financed NWA and Dr. Dre, along with many others. It was the Federal Bureau of Prisons who placed Freeway Rick Ross and Harry O together, which led to the formation of Death Row Records with Dr. Dre and Suge Knight. Ice Cube, in a 2024 interview with Bill Maher, claimed, quote, "The same people who own the record labels own the private prisons. Literally the same people. The records that come out are really geared to push people towards that prison industry," unquote.
Same people who own the labels own the prisons.
Literally the same people?
Literally the same people who own the labels own private prisons. The records that come out are really geared to push people towards that prison industry.
Hip-hop blog site hiphopisred.com had posted a letter which the publishers had been given in 2012, which had claimed a meeting had taken place in 1991 between higher-up executives and their record label employees who had purchased stakes within the music industry, with there being a total of 20 people present at a location in the outskirts of Los Angeles. The letter claimed to have come from someone within the meeting who wanted to go public, where they claimed that the meeting appeared as a typical business meeting, and some of the more powerful executives stated themselves in their own circle, while the employees would network together. The letter claimed the meeting was under a confidentiality agreement, meaning no discussions could leave the room. The letter claimed that a conference began where a speaker spoke on the respective companies in attendance, and how connections to the executives had invested in a very profitable industry, which could become even more rewarding with active involvement within the rap industry. The letter claimed the conference speaker explained how the companies had connections to investments in the construction companies who were responsible for the building of privately owned prisons in the US, and how the position of influence within the music industry could make the investments even more profitable. The letter claims the prisons were built by privately owned companies, which were invested in by connections to the executives, which had received funding based on the number of inmates, so the more inmates meant the more funding. The letter described as how a collective in the early 1990s from this meeting, gangster rap was to be promoted as much as possible to influence gang violence and drug dealing, to make the investments from the music executives' connections into the private prisons more profitable. The letter was released in 2012, which was then spread throughout hip-hop blogs online, but it has never been verified. The Big Four is the name given to 4 record labels which own and control 90% of the music industry. These labels are currently EMI, Sony Music, Universal Music Group, and Warner Music Group. Core Civic, formerly known as Corrections Corporations of America, and another company called GEO Group, owns portions of almost all the private prisons in the USA. Corrections Corporation of America purchased prisons in 48 states of America, with the contract including that the prison must maintain an occupancy inmate rate of 90% filled at all times in order to stay funded for the rate of the contract. The 2 companies for the private prisons are then connected into the Big Four record labels, being through Vanguard and BlackRock, which are the largest shareholders in both media and prisons. Vanguard and BlackRock are both shareholders in Core Civic and GEO Group. BlackRock Inc. are the shareholders of Sony Music. Rapper Rick Ross is signed by Epic Records, who is owned by Sony Music, whose investors are BlackRock. Vanguard are the shareholders of Universal Music Group and Warner Music Group, with EMI then being owned by Universal Music Group. The music industry have published magazines which influenced the prison systems, such as the Source magazine's Hip Hop Behind Bars edition, which showcased all the hip-hop stars' mugshots. The Source magazine is owned by the North Star Group, whose largest shareholder is Vanguard. Vibe magazine, which is a hip-hop magazine, was launched by Time Inc., which was revealed earlier as forming Time Warner and Warner Music Group, whose shareholders are Vanguard, with Time Inc.'s head formerly being General Charles Douglas Jackson, the past CIA mediator. Vibe magazine were known for promoting and creating the term East Coast-West Coast War, being the rap war of the 90s with their feature piece of P. Diddy and Biggie, with this war being a believed catalyst in the deaths of Tupac and Biggie.
The East Coast-West Coast thing is something that the journalists and people are making up just to get paid off it. When it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast-West Coast war, when you're telling them about an East Coast-West Coast war that they would never know exists.
After the shooting death of rapper Takeoff on Halloween of 2022, record executive Robert Starbuck had come out and made further claims about the music industry and its connection into glamorizing crime and the prison industry. Robert Starbuck, who worked with the likes of Snoop Dogg and Lil Yachty, had claimed that the labels are encouraging rappers to push crime and a destructive lifestyle in their songs, as they are allegedly, according to him, in cahoots with their owners being the shareholders who are using the artists as pawns. He had also claimed that record labels are allegedly laundering money through rap artists, and this, according to him, is the reason why labels put more money forward than usual for rappers' music videos than other genres of music. He claimed that the laundering is allegedly taking place between the labels and their shareholders through the rap industry.
The record executives that push for them to continue to make songs and create a culture that is obsessed with death, drugs, and sex. The record executives that push you to do this to go and continue to profit off the backs of your work, they're then taking the money off the top end, and you see on your royalty check, oh, they spent $150,000 on this video. Where did the money go? And to who? Their friend's company? A lot of times that's the case. There's a lot of money laundering involved, and it's because they know the culture that's been created.
Some believe that Rick Ross may have been an industry plant. An industry plant is described by Wikipedia as an artist whose public image is manufactured for them by the record labels and become popular through their connections in the music industry. People look at Rick Ross being a former correctional officer who takes on the persona of a 90s drug kingpin of the Iran-Contra affair, who then used the persona to push music which promoted committing crimes, which then benefits the record label shareholders who also own shares in the privatized prison system. Content creator DJ Vlad was assaulted by rapper Rick Ross in 2008 after he had went on to question him about his time as a correctional officer. DJ Vlad sued Rick Ross for $2 million in a federal court, being for permanent bodily injuries, and was awarded $250,000. In 2009, rapper 50 Cent had interviewed the mother of Rick Ross's child, where she exposed him for being a former correctional officer and claimed his entire image had been manufactured and faked. Freeway Rick Ross was released from prison in 2009 after he had found a loophole where he had been falsely imprisoned under a three strikes law after being set up by Danilo Blandone. In 2010, the real Rick Ross sued the rapper for $10 million, filing a copyright infringement lawsuit. The case was dismissed, with another trial happening in 2013, being Freeway Rick Ross against the rapper, along with Warner Music Group. The court ruled in favor of the rapper Rick Ross and Warner Music Group, allowing him to keep the name based on a First Amendment ruling. Freeway Rick Ross had a judgment of $700,000 placed against him for the legal fees which were spent by the defense of William Roberts in the lawsuit. Freeway Rick Ross believes the music industry should be held accountable for the rapper's lyrical content due to its influence over the youth. Freeway Rick Ross started selling merch with a slogan which read, "The real Rick Ross is not a rapper." The rapper Rick Ross refused to acknowledge that he used to be a correctional officer for many years until he finally began to admit it in 2022. YouTuber and social media star 1090 Jake in April of 2024 shared alleged training footage of Rick Ross's time as a correctional officer. XXL magazine, whose shareholders are both Vanguard and BlackRock, claimed to have debunked the training footage, claiming that the TVs seen in the background are not the same models which were available in 1995. However, many real photos from Rick Ross's time as a correctional officer, along with his employment records, have been released. In this video, we took a look into the past life of rapper Rick Ross's stint as a correctional officer. The ties resurfaced after there was claimed to be new footage of him during his time as a recruit. This then further brought about the discussion of hip-hop's ties into the prison industry. Let me know what your thoughts are on all this in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, smash the thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and press that bell button so you can get all the future notifications for when I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.